The Rundown, Part 25, a Farlost story by John Miro.
Twilight fell upon the darkening road. I found myself again alone. Street lights went out by one, by two, by three. And I reveled in the shadows that had grown. Yes, I reveled in the darkness I had known.
This is Jarvie reporting on surprise events here in an emergency session of Locklaw City Council. Martin Lattiser, slumped in his chair, one eye barely open, looked over the top of his glasses. The image displayed on the recently repaired window of his boss's penthouse office showed the Manta reporter floating in front of Locklaw Council Hall. Martin cocked the other eye. Jarvie wasn't just floating, his wings were aflutter, his mouth graspers jerking. Down past Jarvie at the center of the council chamber, still on the speaker's dais, was a scowling Bennet Underwood, waiting for all other councillors to depart the chamber so he, as speaker, could finally surrender the dais and officially close the session. Martin whistled. His boss wore a face for killing. Noted opponent to the Haven SG trade negotiations being voted on today, Councillor Cree, moments ago announced the surprise reversal of his position, and the vote has carried. I repeat, on this day, Locklaw has ended its embargo of System Guard-affiliated sister city Haven SG. Martin watched the on-screen image of Underwood, standing red-faced atop the dais and glaring at the camera, watched him clasp his right wrist in front of his body with his left hand and hold it there. Underwood's eyes seemed to burn right through the cameras. Martin caught the prearranged signal and jerked out of his chair. He nodded at the image, as if Underwood could see him. "You got it, boss," he said, his voice growing deeper, excited. "It's about time I got to play." Too long later, Bennet Underwood was finally escorted through the bowels of the hall to the secured garage beneath. He couldn't hear the polite congratulations of the underlings he passed. He could barely keep his vision straight. He needed to get out of here. He needed to know Martin had done what was needed. On that long walk, keeping emotion bottled up, snarls swallowed, took everything Bennet had had. It had all gone so horribly wrong. Yes, the council had approved the negotiations, but Cree had hijacked his emotional speech to the city, hijacked the tone and substance of every reporter's story in Locklaw and throughout Farlost, Bennet was sure. And somehow, Cree had stolen the transport fleet contract with Haven SG from Underwood Industries, too. Bennet had been outplayed in politics and in business. He had failed to destroy an enemy, and he might have just turned a potential ally into another enemy. It was time to clean up his mess. He tugged at his collar as his escort passed out of the long hall, angling down into the garage proper. He had to hold on to his panic, hold on to his rage. The people couldn't see that. They didn't know they needed that. They wouldn't vote for that. "Esteemed colleague," shrieked a Manta voice, and the windbag Cree swooped right into Bennet's face. By some miracle, he kept his balled fists at his side and kept his fury lidded. Cree opened his mouth and breathed a hot, humid, rank breath right into Underwood's face. A rank insult, but the fat councillor's wings beat hard and put space between them before anyone else could observe the discourtesy. "I look forward to a more constructive working relationship going forward, Underwood," Cree gloated. "Now I'm writing a thermal of public sentiment you blew for me." The councillor beat his wings again and swooped down into his own waiting carrier. Underwood did not trust himself to speak, but only walked forward silently when his escorts waved him on towards his own carrier. "Before you go," called another voice Underwood did not want to hear, but could ill afford to ignore. Pushing his face into a somber but warm expression, Underwood turned to face the scratched but smiling face of Consul Gomersall. "Consul, let me say again how sorry I am for the tragic loss. Let's say I'm touched and grateful, shall we?" Gomersall stood tall, hands tucked behind his back in parade rest position. He still bore all the same cuts and scrapes as he had in the council hall, but he wasn't limping now, wasn't wincing with every draw of breath. "I'm off to sign some contracts with Cree on behalf of the nationalized industry of Haven SG. I am sorry we won't be working together, Bennet." But Cree needed to rehabilitate his image, which made him a more motivated partner. Bennet grimaced and nodded. "Of course, I am sure in future Underwood Industries will be able to tender a very competitive counterbid." "Don't worry yourself about that now," Gomersall said, nodding when his escorts beckoned him towards an approaching carrier. "I understand you have more pressing problems. Cree tells me there are new revelations of another shadowy underworld figure having had a hand in the bombing poor Cree has taken so much abuse for. Semat, I think Cree said?" Gomersall chuckled. "But forgive me, I'm sure that will soon be a police matter and none of my concern." Underwood said nothing. At the door of the carrier, Gomersall turned and walked back. "Oh, where is my mind today?" The consul produced a small jewelry box and held it out to Underwood. "In exchange for your support in helping usher in this momentous new era between our people." Underwood opened the velvet-lined case, looked down, and slammed it shut again, jerking his face up to stare hatefully at Gomersall. Gomersall looked coldly back. "I trust Haven and the Guard can count on your continued cooperation." He turned away without waiting for a response. Underwood put the box in the inside pocket of his suit jacket with trembling fingers. He stared ahead at nothing until he was ushered into his carrier and the door closed behind him, sealing him in the private passenger area. Then he screamed until his throat was raw and slammed his fist against the window over and over. After landing his borrowed cargo carrier halfway down a dilapidated tenement block deep in Piertown, Martin Ladouceur stepped out the side door whistling. He was dressed just like the cheery fumigator drawn on the side of the carrier, complete with face mask hanging around his neck, plastic suit, and hoodie. He whistled as he sauntered around to the back of the vehicle and dragged out a large fumigator rig comprised of a few hoses, a barrel-sized canister, and a selection of spray wands and nozzles, all on wheels. The canister proudly bore a stylized insect all too familiar in this part of town, and below that, the terrible slogan, "Don't let face biters bug you." Still whistling, he hauled the large tank toward one unmarked corner building, this in a far better state of repair than all the others on the block. He was still 2 buildings away when 6 Skanen fell in behind him from boarded-up doorways on either side of the street. He feigned nervous looks backwards, letting the whistle fade away as he waddled onwards in his oversized plastic work suit. By the time he reached the corner, 3 lumbering exoed humans were blocking the door to the building. The shiny exoskeletons and bumpy chitinous armor surrounded Martin, closing off any avenue of escape. Not that escape was something he wanted, though they might, soon enough. Hi, fellas. I'm from Face Biter Fumigators," Martin said, fumbling with the gas canister as he balanced it on its wheels and stepped nervously forward. "Don't want any trouble. Cripes, my manager didn't tell me I was..." He shook his head and laughed hollowly. "Doesn't matter. Can I just..." He pointed one shaking finger at the front of his suit. When no one objected, he reached up to the collar of the suit and slipped the seal, parting the suit to his waist. When he reached his hand inside, he heard the whines and clicks of handheld weapons training on him. "Shit! Just getting my work order! Shit!" The smallest of the exoed humans walked forward. He looked down with a smirk. "Don't pull anything out fast. Just use 2 fingers, 4 eyes." Martin's eyes widened behind the lenses of his glasses. They were clear for once. No light shone from them. Their wearer nodded and kept on nodding as he put 2 fingers inside the gray protective suit and slowly withdrew a slate. The Skanen had fanned out behind him, mandibles clacking. The whines of more weapons being readied filled the air. The exode thug in charge read the slate and shook his head. "Wrong block, moron," he said and tossed it back. "You're on the south side. This order's for the north end." Martin theatrically fumbled the grab, reached with his other hand, stumbling off the sidewalk onto the street, and still dropped the square of metal and plastic. One of the Skanen laughed. 2 more joined in. "Get out of here before we eat ya," another Skanen barked. "Gee, you sure?" Martin asked, bending over for the slate again. He dropped to one knee and lifted up the slate to flick away the work order. Another screen popped up in its place. On it was a single red button. He turned back to look at the gangsters, squeezing one eye shut to gauge his height, and knelt a little lower to the ground. "Seems to me you got a real pest problem here." He touched the button just as the lead exo's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Behind him on the sidewalk, the fumigator rig exploded. Shrapnel hurtled away on a precisely calculated course, severing all 9 sentients' tops from their bottoms. When the smoke lifted, there was only seared and pitted walls, a multicolored graffiti of blood, and sirens wailing from inside the building. Unscathed, Martin straightened, whistling again as he tapped 2 more buttons on the slate. Before he could pocket the device, a crackling sound built to a roar of white noise in the back of the carrier he'd parked down the street. Then came a whoomp, which he felt in his bones. His vision blurred momentarily, the sirens died mid-wail, and the lights inside the building winked out, confirming what Martin had already known. Every sensor, circuit, camera, and control system in half a kilometer was now dead. Nodding appreciatively at the ruin of bodies before him, Martin pulled off the face mask and shrugged out of the gray suit. It fell, and dark gray leather shoes stepped out. They led up to perfectly pressed gray slacks and jacket over a lighter gray shirt and a darker gray tie. With one finger, Martin reached up and pushed the glasses up over his nose. At the touch, they darkened, and light threw strange shadows across his forehead and short salt and pepper hair. The whirring coming from the insides of the fumigator rig changed pitch as the egg-shaped assault drone hidden within completed its system check. Martin unbuttoned his jacket and withdrew 2 handguns from their shoulder holsters. Scraping metal sounds came from behind him as a selection of armaments extruded themselves from the drone, now hovering above and behind him in sentry mode. The sounds of pounding feet and skittering claws echoed from inside the shattered doorframe. Martin ignored the cacophony, squeezing one of his weapons between his arm and chest, just long enough to reach down and fix closed the 2 buttons of his blazer. "Time to play," Martin murmured, grabbing the butt of the second weapon again. He entered the building, walking eagerly towards the sound of an army thundering close. He kept on smiling and whistling. The drone followed along, unleashing a barrage of slugs and beams over its master's head. Locklaw Sky City Pier, Underwood Industries secure dock. The shadows of passing bodies made the light from the hall strobe through the crack in the door behind which Roland Bird and his escorts watched and waited. It was a change, at least, Bird thought, from sitting in the dark listening to the damned wind. Bird hated the sound of the wind out here beyond the city walls. Maybe it was his imagination, maybe not, but the whole place seemed to vibrate with the wind, like it was toying with the pier. Bird wasn't afraid of a single living thing, but after barely getting off that cop Usher's ship and away from the pier in one piece the first time, he didn't want anything to do with that wind. "Okay," murmured the tin can behind him. Murdo slapped a tentacle on the tumbler who had met them in Pier Town, and it slapped suction cups down on the sliding section of wall that was in fact a very old, very rusty hidden door. Despite the copious lube they'd sprayed on its tracks, it still squealed as the tumbler's muscular tentacle wrenched it open. Murdo pushed hard on the other 2, and they tumbled out into the hall. Bird scanned both ways and saw no waiting eyes. He'd been assured electronic eyes would be looking elsewhere, thanks to more rot in the system. Across the hall, just meters away, stood a cargo pod-sized airlock. A holo display painted 10-foot letters on the wall reading Underwood Industries on the left of the lock and Cargo Carrier Orion on the right. Then he whirled to face the mountain of exoskeleton. "Don't push me again," he ground out through clenched teeth. "I'm the talent on this job, remember?" Murdo sneered and pushed Bird to the left. "That way." "This is as far as I go," the mottled gray and black tumbler hissed and chirped, its muzzle peeking out from one of the honeycomb holes in its spherical cage. "Yep," Murdo said, turning to face the tumbler. As its tentacles rolled its cage of bone back inside the open section of wall, he tossed a small, lumpy ball into the dark and reached out with one armored hand to yank the wall section closed. Bird heard a hiss from inside the wall. Half a second later, a tentacle-sized dent appeared on the wall. The wall rang with the impact, but the exoed human easily kept it closed as more dents fell. Then, nothing from the chamber. "You do anything you're told, huh?" Bird said, his meaningless, wide smile on his face. "A real full-service son of a bitch." "Move," Murdo instructed, reaching out with his long arms and pulling him across to the airlock. Bird's smile twisted into something else, but he walked. "You don't want to put your hands on me again." Bird gestured in the light field, forming the words, and the armor covering an access panel to the left of the door rolled up into the wall. 2 more taps, and the airlock door opened. Lightning fast, he reached out and grabbed Bird hard by the arm again. "Sure I do," he said, and tossed Bird a dozen feet inside the airlock. "What the hell?" A portly crew member in a red and blue vacuum suit jogged over to Bird's side. He leaned over laughing, offering his hand. "What did you do to piss off your friends so—" The boom of the pistol Bird tugged from the watch officer's belt roared like an explosion in the confined space, stacked to the rafters with square cargo pods. Murdo slammed the door shut and whirled to face Bird. "You want to bring that dock patrol back?" Bird rolled the body of the dead watch officer to free the holster belt, which he sealed around his waist. Murdo noticed he did not holster the weapon. He scowled and took a step forward. Bird said, raising the weapon. Murdo lowered his head. There was armor plating under his skin to the front of his scalp. His neck and body armor was thick enough to deflect anything Bird's little pistol could throw. Only a direct shot to the face would stop him. "We have a job to do," he growled. "Nah," Bird said and cocked the pistol. "I think I can handle it from here." Murdo lowered his head and charged. "You piece of shit!" Bird pulled the trigger, and again the sound of thunder filled the cargo hold. Once set to close combat mode, Martin only heard the whir of the assault drone when it floated past his head on the stairs. Somewhere in the shadows of the square staircase above, a shot rang out. Martin heard it ping off the metal case of the drone. A flash of light and a sizzle of flesh followed, and a chirp from the machine indicated it was once again all clear above. Martin raced up the stairs, pointing 2 fingers at the door and pumping his fist. The drone captured his instructions and blew the door apart with 60 solid slugs. The metal door deformed, then ripped, and added its own fragment to the drone's hail of bullets into the hall beyond. Martin let the drone go first and followed behind, raising both his weapons. 2 shooters were bunkered down behind a table on its side at the end of the hall. The drone released intelligent shot rounds to block their fire, and only 2 of their rounds made it through. Martin staggered as they hit his left chest and thigh. The system guard light armor woven into his suit did its job, stopping the bullets and distributing the kinetic energy throughout his body. He felt heat build up as the energy was dispersed, and the leftover force was only enough to push him stumbling back a few steps and crack 1 rib. He thumbed controls on the grip of both pistols and fired around the drone. The flechettes he selected hissed through the air and through the table just as easily. What was left of the shooters slumped over the table, their bodies steaming from the speed and heat of the impacts. "What are you spending all that money we pay you on, Semet?" Martin called out. "Sure ain't on good help." He hand-signaled the drone forward and followed close behind. Come out, wherever you are." "The ship will be automated," Usher told Jacoby and Tyzan. They were gathered around the ball on the third floor of the roadhouse again, all staring into a sphere of light above its polished wood surface. "1 or 2 crewmen," Usher went on, pointing at an aerial view of the pier. Where he circled his fingers on the far right of the pier, halfway between the city wall and the torn snarl at the end, a red oval appeared. "Hold on, Inspector. How are you gonna get onto the dock in the first place?" Jacoby asked. "You can't exactly flash your badge and call in the troops if Underwood is as plugged in as you think he is. There's a 6-layer cake of city cops, union, and corporate security on the pier 24/7, and that's if you get past the wall in the first place." Tyzan listened to the Pondy with the forked beard and bare chest with grudging respect. Jacoby had worked the docks before earning the scratch for his operation and setting up shop as a pond information broker. He seemed to know a little about everything, and he impressed Tyzan for the way he had accepted the risk and opportunity Ada had presented him not an hour before. Ada. He. Tyzan rubbed at his temples. Contemplating the joint gave him a headache, especially the beautiful Hyde host he'd just spent the evening with. He cast a sidelong glance at Usher. The inspector must be feeling an even worse headache, he thought. Finding out your one-night stand was a little bit more complicated than you thought. You couldn't hold a candle to finding out your ex-partner was not dead, nor in jail, but joined with a legendary underworld peacemaker and fixer. The swinging doors from the kitchen slammed open. "What's he still doing here?" Spillane grunted, pushing Jacoby out of the way and slamming down 3 long rectangular boxes on the bar top. "Ada told me to stick," Jacoby glared right back. "Not sure why," he admitted, and walked out from behind the counter, making room for Spillane to crack open the boxes. Tyzan stiffened as Spillane pulled some very familiar shapes from the boxes. Usher picked up one of the dull gray attack weapons and whistled. "You planning to fight your way through pier security? These are pretty, but you better have a tank in that kitchen. Ada knows what he's chewed off," Spillane muttered and tossed another of the smooth-sided rifles to Tyzan. Tyzan instinctively slipped his fingers into grooves along the sides of the deceptively light, wedge-shaped weapon. He tapped a finger on the black screen inlaid in its side. A display of icons informed him the energy cells were full, as were the materials cartridges, capable of printing any manner of live rounds in seconds at high capacity. "These are guard-designed." Tyzan pressed his fingernails into the side of the display and began tearing the weapon apart quickly. He saw the serial numbers pressed into the alloy beneath. "These are guard issue. Where did you get them?" he demanded of the Skanen. "We bought 'em," Spillane answered plainly. Tyzan looked at his weapon again, traced a scorch mark on the side with 2 fingers, struggling to hold on to a growing fury. "Did you ever wonder how the arms dealer got them? Did you ever wonder who they hurt or killed to get them?" Between being a soldier and becoming a cop, Tyzan had served border guard security. There he saw firsthand what pirates left behind when they raided system guard ships. It didn't happen often. Most times the guard traveled in convoys, and this kind of theft was one of the reasons, one of the messy, tragic reasons. "Oh, I'm sure they killed good men," Spillane scoffed. "We bought 'em off the guard, after all. Quite a tidy sum we paid to the captain of the patrol cruiser who sold them to us, too." Tyzan's face turned white, his fury blowing away. Against everything he trusted, held sacred, his instincts told him Spillane was telling the truth. He looked at the weapon again. Usher clapped him on the shoulder. "There's bad guys everywhere, Donald," he said softly. Tyzan nodded. His face turned angry again, and his fingers began expertly reassembling the weapon. "And it's our job to put them away." "Shit," Spillane swore, angrily yanking extra magazines from one of the boxes and tossing them to Tyzan. He tossed the weapon from one hand to the other and caught the mags, blinking at Spillane. "You're making it hard to hate you on automatic, doggy." Usher chuckled. "Yeah, he does that." Tyzan's face colored, ready to take offense, but instead of curling back in a sneer, a smile and a chuckle took root and grew. He shook his head. What was up and down? Was he really standing here in a criminal's lair and feeling at home? In the company of men he trusted? Are we ready? All four heads turned. Tyzan saw Ada walking down the sliding tiles from her private quarters on the 4th floor. Jane's body wore a black combat suit and her red cloak from the night before. His body, not hers, Tyzan reminded himself, giving his head another shake, at least for the moment. Yeah, Spillane growled, piling another of the heavy weapons and a matching pistol on the counter beside a mountain of clips. The roadhouse is closed for renovations, and the staff's got the day off. Tyzan watched Ada twist knobs and check clips on both weapons before stowing them inside her flowing cloak. His flowing cloak. A good idea, Ada murmured to Spillane, keeping our people out of harm's way until we can finish this, Usher said, a joke playing on his voice. Ada smiled wryly back. Well, let's say settle things down, Inspector. Have we figured out who we're settling down? Tyzan asked, accepting a shoulder rig from Spillane with distaste. The rig was meant for concealed carry, a criminal's choice of gear. The guard? Asked Jacoby, standing behind Ada at the bar. He raised his hands in surrender before Tyzan could even scowl back. Just saying you guys are spooky, no offense. Spillane walked around Ada and turned his back to Jacoby, cutting off Tyzan's view of the man. Cree, Spillane guessed. Ada stowed the last of her ammo magazines. I have no shortage of enemies and no time for guessing games. Spillane, send all of the Roadhouse's security out. I want them with our people and their families until we know more. Spillane grunted his agreement and stomped back around the bar to send the messages in a hollow field. Tyzan was surprised. He'd known guard generals who would lay their men down for cannon fodder to keep themselves alive and claim it was for the greater good. He admired the Hide's commitment to its people, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. He wore the medallion. There was a right way and a wrong way to do things. You wouldn't have to keep your people safe if you weren't taking the law in your own hands. Jacoby laughed. All eyes turned back to the man, still bare-chested, still sober, despite flashing longing gazes at the bottles behind Spillane's bar. It took him a minute to notice their attention. What? He growled in response to the disapproval Tyzan knew was etched in his face. How'd that work out for your brother, doing the right thing? Jacoby's face softened. I'm sorry you lost someone. But people gotta stand up. Ain't no law gonna do it all for them. Tyzan tensed. His body went rigid. He took no offense. He could see the sympathy in Jacoby's face as well as the fierce independence that led him to make the claim. How the hell did I end up here, Salah? He swung violently around and crossed to the nearest table, kicking a chair around and slumping down in it. This is what we know, Ada said softly. Underwood has a tie to Samat. Samat paid us in wealth and favors to get 2 people out of the city. He hesitated. One of them most likely is Bird. And Crory hasn't checked in yet, Spillane grumbled. The stupid noodle nest never comes back late from runs out to the pier. Ada reached across the bar and rapped Jane's right knuckles against Spillane's chitinous forearm. We're going after him. Roadhouse takes care of its own. I respect your commitment. Look, we have to get Bird first, Tyzan growled. Ada craned his head. Hair fell over Jane's right eye and concern clouded her face. It's the same mission. Usher sighed dramatically. No cops? Ada nodded. We don't know who we can trust, or who's listening in. Not to mention the Roadhouse's involvement can't fall under suspicion. Okay, Usher said, walking forward and collecting a stack of clips from the bar. No reinforce? Tyzan bolted out of his chair. How do you live like this? The words bubbled out in an almost laugh. You sound like the good guys, but you're... Spillane growled. He's got a point here, Usher countered the Skanen. Nobody voted for you. Nobody chose you. It's complicated, yes, Ada agreed sympathetically. But every society has a place like this Roadhouse, a person like me, who makes choices for others, unelected, sometimes for themselves, sometimes looking out for others. Surely you don't think the Guard is different? Tyzan opened his mouth to shout, yes, it is, but stopped himself. Did he really believe that anymore? I want it to be, he muttered and walked away. Spillane and Jacoby both snorted their opinions, then glared at each other silently across the bar. Underwood was elected, Ada said. Doesn't stop him from doing whatever he has to get what he wants. Gomersall came here to open trade, and he's siding with someone who was willing to blow him up in order to get what he came here for. Do you think if you brought what you know to him, he would reveal Underwood's role in his own assassination attempt? Just to capture the terrorist Roland Bird. Undo the trade deal he's crafted. Tyzan's head was spinning. He turned and smashed the butt of his rifle onto the ancient wooden table. He smashed again and again until with a thunderous crack the table cleaved in two, falling to either side with ear-splitting strikes. He turned, heaving, sweat trickling down his brow. He nodded. No reinforcements, but I walk out of here with Bird. Every set of shoulders in the room relaxed. Dead or alive, you have my word, Ada promised. There can be no trail, no trace of evidence tying the roadhouse to his escape. Beyond that, I don't care what happens to that piece of filth. Usher offered Tyzan his hand. We'll bring him in. Tyzan stared at the hand incredulously. He barked a laugh, but it died quickly when he saw Usher's face harden. He took the hand just as quickly, shame filling him that he'd come close to offending the Locklaw cop. Didn't I tell you that just yesterday? The handshake was warm. They each squeezed a little harder, and then a little harder again, challenging each other. Both men smiled. If that's settled, Ada spoke again, Spillane will get you inside the pier. Try again, Ada, Spillane roared, surprise and concern tinging his deep voice. I stay with you. Ada quirked a smile. I have another errand to run. On my own. Like hell, Spillane disputed, leaning his massive upper body over the bar and snapping his mandibled jaws at his employer. I'll put my best men on the buddy cops here. Not this time, Spillane. Ada shook Jane's head slowly, fixing her eyes fiercely on Spillane. Semet and Underwood, in business together? I've always known not to trust Underwood. Knew better than to get in bed with him, even if I was too blind to see his ties to Semet. He must have been pulling Semet strings from before there was a council, and it's up to me to resolve this problem. Tyzan mulled those words. Before there was a council? Resolve how, exactly? Usher asked, his tone guarded. Ada laughed Jane's laugh. Oh, relax. I'm not going to kill him. Her eyes took on a faraway look. We're going to have a little talk. Ada looked back to Spillane, reached out and patted his forearm, gently this time. He glared harder. The roadhouse has to come out looking strong, Spillane. There is no Ada if there is no roadhouse. Spillane sagged a little and, surprising Tyzan, nodded. What ship is he on? Tyzan wanted to know. Spillane turned his massive head towards him. Underwood Industries has an ore hauler called Orion. Elegant, Tyzan assessed. Underwood has you put his pawn on his own ship, with a paper trail leading back through you to a gangster. You get him away, he wins. He gets caught. You take the fall, and he stays clean. Perfect. We'll never get to Orion, Usher said, reaching into Spillane's holofield and calling up an overhead map of the pier again. Besides the fact there are likely still people looking for us, how do we get through city customs without them catching on to us? Spillane will get you through, Ada said. I just hope you get there in time. Orion is scheduled to leave within the hour. The sound of liquid hitting the bottom of a glass drew everyone's eyes back to Jacoby. He froze, the bottle halfway back to sitting on the bar. What? You're done with what's up here, right? He lifted the glass and waved it in front of his forehead, then put the glass to his lips. Ada reached out and stopped him from taking a sip. Sorry, no. Jacoby looked miserable. What do you want now? He asked petulantly as he dropped the glass back to the bar. You already sent Conchito away. What's a guy supposed to do? Stay right here, and stay sober. Ada handed the man another tiny vial. Take this. Keep it sealed for a day. If I'm not back by then, there are instructions in there for taking care of my people and releasing certain information. Tyzan smiled, appreciating without reservation what Ada was saying. If you get taken off the board, a lot of people will go with you. Ada curled Jane's lips. Just so, Officer Tyzan. Tyzan felt heat on his face momentarily, but he was getting used to this with Ada, and the awkward moment passed quickly. Spillane jogged around the bar. Ada, you can't! His Skanen features telegraphed surprise and disgust. He's a drunk and a pindy and a stranger. Jacoby folded his arms across his hairy, barreled chest and scowled. I wasn't a stranger when you needed me to save your asses. He's one of us. Ada looked at Jacoby. It has to be a Pondy, and there's no one else I trust. Besides, I have a feeling about this one, Spillane. Jacoby wrapped one of his beard's twin braids in the knuckles of one hand and beamed. He's a stranger, Spillane muttered again. Ada just laughed and gestured down at the body he shared with Jane. I've had to trust strangers with everything before. She looked to Jacoby. One day, Mr. Jacoby. Then you take what's in the vial. Count on it. Jacoby's face was overcome with pride. I'm your man, Ada. Spillane sneered over Ada's shoulder at the Pondy. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then clacked his mandibles loudly in frustration. Take care of our house, meat sack, he spat. Jacoby snorted. It'll be here when you skitter on home, Crabby. Jacoby nodded to each sentient, then sauntered up to the 4th floor without another word. Get our people safe, Ada told Spillane, buckling Jane's red cloak closed and flipping the hood over her face. Good hunting, Ada said, and started across the room for the tile path down to the ground floor. The room was silent until the last flash of red disappeared. Usher leaned on the bar and tapped Spillane on the shoulder, breaking his locked gaze on the place where Ada had gone. So let's hear it. How the hell are you going to get us into the most secure place in Locklaw through a wall of cops still looking for Bird, not to mention customs security and corporate security all over the docks? You aren't going to like it, Spillane grumbled. And neither do I, considering we sure as hell won't be using this route again. Not after we take you through it, Inspector. His body wilted a little, and he looked back the way Ada had gone. She can take care of herself, Tyzan reassured the big Skanen, rubbing his jaw and wincing. Spillane stood a little straighter. Yeah, he can. Spillane grabbed a second weapon off the bar, filled his middle arms with as much ammo as his claws would hold, and beckoned Usher and Tyzan to follow. All right, let's move. On the top floor of the Piertown tenement, a corpulent Skanen, overweight with extra thick plates of chitin, cowered on his belly in a corner. Around him floated empty white holo fields, absent the data streams from cameras and optical implants within his servants. Samat waited in the dark, listening to the crack-crack of slugs, the sizzle of energy beams, and to the screams. Security systems and lights were out across the building. He wasn't sure how many intruders had stormed his lair. From the sounds of the battle, it could be dozens. It could be an entire rival gang, going by the frequency of the screams and the terror in the dying gurgles of his street enforcers. They'd killed 31 of his men, everyone in the building, below this floor. The fight was right outside the door now. In the center of the room, his last, best 5 guards stood in a line, weapons raised and sighted on the door. Samat looked to the other door on the far wall, the one that led to the roof. There was a carrier there waiting for him, but he was too fat and old to move quickly. In fact, he was too scared to move at all. He wondered again why he'd let Martin Lattiser talk him out of retirement. He slashed a claw symbolically at his own belly, then at his reproductive organs in silent answer. The money, the reputation, the food, and the mating. Oh, all the mating. He'd almost completed his lifelong goal of laying atop every species. None of it mattered now. Nothing mattered except getting out of this room in one piece. Then he could disappear. He had enough money hidden for that. He hadn't survived 2 careers in organized crime before and after the fall of the dragons without knowing how to disappear and hiding enough funds to do it. This would be the last time. No one would find him after he escaped again, and he'd never be tempted back into business with monsters like Lattiser again. What good was having it all if you were dead? He looked back to his well-paid protectors. All his guards were human. Semet had always had a way with motivating that species. Their pride could get them killed. He counted on them getting killed, instead of him. These 5 were all stupidly muscled exoskeleton-wearing humans, his most skilled at killing, expertly, quickly, without thought or remorse. Semet clacked his mandibles. "Keep some alive. First, we find out who sent them," he ordered, as if he had any intention of sticking around once the shooting was over. "Then we teach them what it costs coming into our home. We'll teach them for hours until they beg." Somehow he kept the tremble out of the sound-making organs inside his thorax. A couple of the humans shouted. The rest pumped fists or pointed their weapons into the air. Fools. He watched the lead exo lift his hand in a fist, shutting down the rowdy posturing and drawing all eyes to him. He dropped 2 fingers below the fist to mimic walking. He was going to go out and get a better look down the stairs. He crossed the room silently and knelt by the door. Another silent pause, then he opened the door fast and sprang away, raising his own rifle again. The other 4 exos took a step closer to the door. Nothing came through. No sound, no shadow. Nothing. The lead exo crouched, pushed the butt of his rifle against his shoulder, and panted out 2 breaths preparing to charge. The moment after his second exhalation, the wall behind him exploded. 4 crisscrossing beams turned the exo into cubes that fell apart and plopped to the floor. Miraculously, none of his men heard Semet's chitter of fear. None of them saw him hide his head beneath all 4 of his upper limbs. They were too busy yelling and directing enough death through that wall to render every particle of flesh beyond it into chunks too small to see. It wasn't flesh that came through the wall, but an egg-shaped drone. Bright beams of light flared from it. One more of the men fell a hole through his chest before the combined firepower of the 3 remaining shooters made the drone spin, then spark, then fall to the floor. They kept firing. The bravest of the 3 jogged across, put a boot on the thing, and shoved the muzzle of his weapon inside a crack in its armor. The drone shattered into pieces that skittered across the floor. Semet couldn't stop shivering. His eyes bulged on their stubby stalks. The men were laughing and hoo-hawing and sauntering over to examine the drone wreckage and slap the ass of the thug who'd downed it. Only one noticed Semet skitter to the door leading out to the roof. "We got him, boss!" Got him? Semet was pretty sure they hadn't. A drone that small? Someone had to be controlling the drone, he knew, and he wanted to be gone before the whine of a beam weapon and the sound of wet innards hitting the floor made Semet change his mind and dive back for his desk, tucking in all 6 of his limbs in a ball. Then the screaming and the shooting filled the room. He was frozen by fear, staring ahead at the few centimeters between the floor and the bottom of his desk. He saw the dead eyes of the bravest exo staring back at him, heard other grunts and shouts. He heard the boom of a hard slug weapon being fired. He saw a tape-wrapped weapon fall to the ground. His men were scared, surprised, failing to comprehend what was happening. A pair of gray shoes danced across the floor between 3 pairs of his men's garishly colored boots. One of those boots rushed forward, and Semet heard the hiss of a blade in the air. The gray shoes disappeared, and then the boots rushing forward did too. Semet jerked his head to the right close to the edge of his desk, in time to see that man hit the wall and collapse in a boneless heap. Another weapon sizzle, and the unconscious exo's top fell to the left, his bottom to the right. Semet ducked to look under the desk again, watching through the gap. Another set of colorful boots were staggering backwards, their movements uncoordinated. A moment later, red drops spattered the shoes. Then more red splashed, coating the shoes, then the floor, then the knees of the man after he'd fallen, and finally the side of his face when he keeled over his fallen, bisected body, glassy-eyed, a long red slice across his throat. "Oh, it's okay, big guy, come on." Semet froze, hearing the cooing, teasing tone. He knew that voice. The gray shoes walked to the center of the room. The last pair of colorful boots backed away. "What? That's all you've got?" The new voice called again, sounding genuinely disappointed. The gray shoes walked on until the pair of footwear loyal to Semat slipped in the blood of his comrades and slammed to the floor. The new voice laughed as the Exo tried to back further away, but kept slipping in blood and falling on his ass. The gray shoes stepped to either side of his legs. There was complete silence. Semat peeked around the corner again. Semat's killer froze, looking up. Gray slacks knelt in the pool of blood. The Exo thug's face was stretched in fear, his breaths coming close together as a long silver blade appeared close to his face. Then a hand gently covered the Exo's mouth. "Shh," the invader whispered, and the knife wiggled in between the seams of armor on the Exo's chest. Semat pulled a slate from inside a curve of chitin under his shoulder joint. "Murdo," the Skanen whisper hissed into it as sticky, wet footsteps came toward the desk. The slate fizzed and popped. No light bloomed. No voice answered. "Murdo," he hissed again. A human in a gray suit and tie sauntered into view. He was relaxed. He grabbed the hems of each leg and shook the fabric, flinging away the red stains to show only pristine cloth. He smiled down at Semat. "Hello there." Semat recognized him. "Martin?" "Semat?" Martin replied, nodding his head in greeting. Semat's paralysis was complete when he saw Martin's special smile grow. The Skanen's voice stopped. He took a deep, shuddering breath and tried again. "I haven't told anyone about Underwood. I haven't recorded it anywhere. Don't do this. I didn't betray him." "Oh, I know. I'm just here to keep it that way." Martin raised his weapon and fired. Semat's throat boiled away before he could scream. Nick, Spillane, and Tyzan walked through the tunnel deep underground. No one spoke. All was silent save for the echo of their footsteps. They had been walking for kilometers. Nick's body was busy reminding him that he'd been shot out of the sky just days before, and that medical science and Jerd spit could only do so much. Tyzan was just ahead, though, and Usher'd be damned if the big guard officer was going to have to slow down for him. He was dressed like a Pierman. Heavy shoes, Kevlar-lined vest, coat, and pants, wide support belts for lugging oversized loads. He barely felt the rifle hanging under his right arm, its incredibly lightweight alloy distributed to both shoulders by the carry harness he wore under the Kevlar work jacket. Under his left arm was a long sling with magazines for the rifle slotted on either side. But it still weighed on him. Super lightweight, state-of-the-art, illegally imported system guard weapons technology. Serious hardware, capable of delivering mass destruction in slugs, beams, radioactive sprays. A war crime with a sexy paint job. It had Nick sweating. Not from any physical weight, but the weight of the undertaking, breaking the law he'd sworn to uphold. Also weighing heavily on him were thoughts of what might be waiting for them on the other end of this illegal, off-the-maps smuggler's tunnel. Locklaw Sky City Police Inspector Nicodemus Usher was hunting a terrorist alongside a criminal and a system guard cop. He was penetrating a secured facility, armed with an illegal weapon to capture or kill a terrorist a politician was secretly protecting. Capture or kill was the only good part of that thought. He really didn't care which at that point, though a part of his soul tugged on him to try his damnedest to bring his man in alive. 2 3-meter-wide strips of metal grating ran down the wide tunnel, bordered by yellow and black warning lines. Light strips glowed white along the patch of floor the party walked on. Lights ahead of them activated upon their approach, and lights behind winked out. Spillane had outfit himself, Tyzan, and Nick with matching jackets and boots, then led them through the basement of a fenced-off building nearby the roadhouse. That entire basement level had dropped into the tunnel they were walking through now. The groans and pops and puffs of dust freed when the drop began suggested it hadn't been used in a long time. Nick passed one of the bracings on the side of the wall. Pipes ran through the braces, spread every 10 or so meters apart. This wasn't just a hidey hole dug by smugglers. There was infrastructure running through here, too. That meant it had once been part of the city and then abandoned and forgotten. He ran a hand over the back of his scalp, rubbing away a cold chill. Nick veered his detective brain away from poking at the tunnel's origins. He had a job to do. He had picked who to trust. He couldn't afford to second-guess himself now. Tyzan dropped back to walk beside him. Nick nodded, but said nothing. Tyzan stayed quiet until the lights leapfrogged ahead again. "So she was your partner?" "Yeah," Nick said, staring ahead. "I don't know if I'm the right person to," Tyzan said, and cleared his throat. "I can tell seeing her again was a steel-toed kick in the head." Nick just kept walking, hoping Tyzan would drop yet another investigation his brain was trying hard to avoid. "Seems to me you've got a shot at something with her. Just don't hurt her again." Nick jerked to a stop and rounded on Tyzan. "What? Why does everyone keep telling me that?" Tyzan smiled kindly at him, robbing Nick of the chance to get angry and avoid the conversation completely. "Sounds like you've got corroborating accounts from multiple witnesses. What's your gut telling you?" Nick shook his head. "Unbelievable. She broke the law. She could have gotten people killed. She got her own ass thrown in jail for falsifying her health data, but I'm the one who—" Tyzan waited patiently. Nick decided he hated him even more for that than for what had happened the night before. Nick recognized the jealousy he felt for what it was, and he couldn't keep it or his own surprise off his face. When Nick's eyebrows shot up and his jaw dropped down, Tyzan clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Inspector. Human males are always the last to know." "Hey, girls," Spillane growled up ahead. "You can share and care later. We got business." Tyzan grinned. A stunned bark of laughter escaped Nick's lips. I'll keep the investigation open." A half-real glare returned to his face. "Meantime, you keep your distance from my, suspect." "You do that, Inspector, and I'll consider my rights read," Tyzan agreed good-naturedly and punched Nick's shoulder playfully. Playful being a relative term, Nick worked to keep a wince off his face as he stumbled back a couple of feet from the blow. "I swear I'll leave you here," Spillane roared again. "You keep that bromance shit up and I'll lock you down here another 50 years. "Another 50 years? Nick's eyes narrowed at those words, and they jogged back up to Spillane, both with unreadable cop expressions fixed in place. Up ahead, a new bank of floor lights lit up, casting shadows over a wall ahead. Seconds later, lights illuminated around a wide airlock door set in that wall. Everyone froze in place, even Spillane. The Skanen recovered first, lumbering towards the door, his face almost masking the same revulsion every sentient in the room was feeling. "This is it," Spillane gestured at the door. "This door opens into a power substation, halfway out on the pier. Keep your guns hid and your hands in plain view if you don't want cops or security dropping you on sight." Nick stepped up to the door, his eyes glued to what he saw there. "We get to Underwood's private dock access. We get to the Orion. We fly out on it. Ada's arranged for another ship to meet us 100 clicks out, and we take whatever's left of Bird with us. Nobody knows we were ever here." Spillane talked a good game, but the spines on the back of his neck were standing on end, and for once he had no quick-witted response when Nick walked past him and raised his fingers to the door. Tyzan stepped up to the door as Nick ran his fingers through the jagged gash in the armored metal. There were 4 large slashes, each more than a hand-length apart. Nick turned and stared accusingly at Spillane. The Skanen looked away. "Those are claw marks," Tyzan gasped, reaching his hand out but never quite touching the slashes. "Dragon claws." Nick felt his mind distancing the revelation from him, insulating him from the implications of where he was and what he was seeing. "Gods help us," he breathed. "I know what this tunnel is." As his carrier descended to ground level in front of his skyscraper and metro, Bennet Underwood opened his leather book. Out rose a hologram of that Manta reporter Jarvie, still dressed from the council meeting, but now standing outside a Piertown building, spectacularly riddled with holes and gore. I repeat, we have confirmation from authorities on the scene that today's apparent gang-related gun battle in Peertown has resulted in the death of Samsara Samat, a Skanen businessman and local figure long believed to have ties with smuggling and protection rackets in the area and throughout the pier. Half the lines of stress faded from Underwood's usually serene face as he clapped the leather book shut. He steepled his fingers together. By burning Samat's organization to the ground, he was back in the clear, with no ties to organized crime. Well, he thought, no ties that could lead to Roland Bird. Bennet's smile clouded as he pulled out the case Consul Gomersall had given him. He couldn't bear to touch it, even to look at it, and shoved it back inside his jacket. The man knew far more than Usher had ever uncovered. He was far more dangerous than Bennet had expected. No fool was he who underestimated the guard, or so he thought. But here he was, caught, or the next thing to it. How had Gomersall found the evidence in the case? He had to tread carefully. The consul could expose him, but he hadn't yet. That meant he wanted something from him, and that gave him time to plan on that front. He filed away the terror of someone knowing his greatest secret to act on more immediate concerns. Next on the list, Roland Bird. That claim-jumping bag of stink, Cree would love to get his hands on him. If he did, Cree would pull whatever body parts out he needed to make Bird sing whatever story he wanted sung. But Bennet had never been within 20 kilometers of Bird. He'd made sure of that. One more rumor wouldn't hurt him on this, so long as Roland Bird disappeared once and for all. He pulled his fingers apart and ghosted them over the knot of his tie. Nothing left that can't wait, he muttered, and nodded for his security crouched outside to open the carrier door. Bennet stepped out to the roar of reporters. He swept towards the building with a serious expression and wise smile for the cameras, until Jane Kelly appeared from the crowd. Her face peered out of a red cloak just behind the line of reporters. He turned to hiss at the closest of his escorts. "The woman in the red cloak, bring her inside. Take her to my office. No one sees her come in." The man nodded and disappeared. Bennet returned to the waving and smiling bit until he got inside. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the guard approach her, saw her nod at the guard and flash her eyes at him as she was led away. Ada here? Bennet thought, his mind reeling. He never thought the Hyde so reckless. Maybe his joining with that Kelly woman had him off his game. Oh, Bennet shook his head. No, Ada never fell off his game. What have I missed? He asked himself. What isn't all wrapped up? He jerked to a stop just inside the building's glass doors. He'd never heard back from Murdo. He'd never gotten the call from Martin last night. Martin had left a text-only message confirming he'd seen Bennet's hand signal and would complete the rush job. There was nothing in that message confirming Murdo finished his own rush job the night before. Martin Ladouceur also never forgot things, never got lazy, never made mistakes. Nicodemus Usher was still alive. The bridge of Underwood Industries Orion was a spacious rectangle with short rows of windows to port and starboard and a long bank of windows looking out over her stubby nose. Behind an empty captain's chair were two pilot stations. An old man with a bleeding cut on his temple sat in one, and a silver exoskeleton wrapped around a corpse sagged in the other. Bird clicked the last harness strap into place over Captain Tippett's chest and gave an experimental tug on the length of wire cutting into the old man's wrists. Tippett groaned. Bird nodded appreciatively as a drop of blood welled up where the wire had already sliced through. "Now remember, Cap," Bird said, walking a little ways forward to the captain's chair and swinging it around. He unholstered his weapon and pointed it at Murdo's body. "I only need you to talk dirty to Pier Control and help me change course. If you're a good boy, I can kill you nice and gentle when that's all done." He waved a hand over the arm of the captain's chair, and a hollow blossomed. The light coalesced into the picture of a younger version of Captain Tippett and a blonde-haired woman sitting cross-legged in a field. A child-sized version of Captain Tippett was captured in the act of laughing at their feet. Or, Bird went on, I can throw you out the airlock, stroll right off the dock the way I came in, and see to it the other tippets die screaming before the sun comes back up. He slashed his hand through the hollow, and the happy family disappeared. Don't, Captain Tippet sobbed. Please, I'll do whatever you say. I figured, Bird said pleasantly and leaned forward, elbows on knees. He looked around as if about to share a secret. And how's about you plot us a new course? Captain Tippet closed his eyes, nodding. Where? He asked. Bird could tell he was dreading the answer. Gonna need your help with that, he said, enjoying the misery on the old coot's face. See, there's a guy in Locklaw who put me in a box and made me his poster boy so he could get in bed with the guard. Bird's smile grew, but his eyes were cold and cruel. I'm nobody's poster boy. Just tell me where, Tippet cried. Oh, fine. Bird leaned back in the captain's chair and kicked at the ground, keeping it spinning slowly around and around. We're gonna fly this ship right up Bennet Underwood's ass. You have been listening to The Rundown, a Farlost story, written by John Miro. Learn more at servingworlds.com. Opening music, Everything Is Not What It Appears, kindly provided by Nate Maingard at natemaingard.com. Closing music, Full On, by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. If you like what you hear, you can become a patron and support more stories at patreon.com/servingworlds. Thanks for listening. See you next week.